So the agenda for today, the first 4 items are very brief, and then we'll spend most of our time on the last 2. So the definition of Scrum and Agile, very brief summary, the definition of CMMI, and then we'll discuss your goals, because the question becomes, what do you want to add to Scrum and Agile to improve the problems you have and the goals you have too. And then we'll look at a quick similarity and differences summary between CMMI and Scrum, and then we'll dig into the details of what typical problems do people have in Scrum and Agile, and how would they get fixed by adding practices or more organizing practices to address those issues, and then a summary at the end. So slide 9 has a very quick summary of Scrum. So for people unaware, the team doing work, like a software team or an IT team, any work they have not done yet, which could be a set of requirements, bug fixes, or enhancements, that will go into the backlog. So backlog is a kind of like a requirements spec or requirements list for a team of work to be done. They then petition the work out into sections, and they determine what would be for them a logical release, and they do release planning. So they may have an idea of all the features and functions they want to deliver, and they go through some estimation to determine roughly how big or how much work there would be there, and then they determine a logical release for that set of functions, and they build a release plan. And then they divide the work up into sprints, and I'm just going to give an example of a sprint being 2 weeks, but it could be 4 or 3 or 1 weeks or 6 weeks. But a 2-week sprint will be common, and they determine the tasks and the activities required to complete the first 2-week increment for that sprint. They go through what they may define as analysis, design, code, and test. Although those words there are team-defined steps, there's no definition in Scrum for those steps specifically. And they pop out of that at the end of the 2 weeks, and they do a sprint review. And the sprint review would be where they demonstrate what they have finished in that 2-week period, and they get feedback on that functionality. And then the last step is the sprint retrospective, like a lessons learned. They determine what went well, what didn't go so well, what they may want to continue doing, and they then take corrective actions on those lessons, and then go to the next increment. The next sprint starts off with a review of the backlog. There may be new items on the backlog that have been put there by the customer or the product owner. There could have been changes in priority or changes in for some of the requirements. They go through and look at the backlog. They understand why and how it changed. They then go into sprint planning for the second sprint. They plan out the tasks and the activities for that 2-week period. They go through a sprint review to demonstrate what they have done, and they go back into lessons learned or retrospectives, and then that's kind of a Friday of the 2 weeks, and then the next Monday we'll be back on the backlog review. And they repeat this cycle until they have finished all the work in the release that they have planned at the very beginning. And the word potentially deliver means that the code or the software or the IT solution is good enough to deliver, is done adequately to deliver, but may make no sense to deliver, that the other functionality required to go with it, or other data, other applications have to be finished before it makes any sense for that particular item to be delivered as an item itself. So the work is good enough to deliver, but they may have to wait for other things to complete before it makes any sense to deliver that thing. So the Scrum team or the Agile team use the items in yellow here to define and control their work. So when we discuss strengthening or improving Agile implementation or Scrum implementation, I think it's important to stick to the the principles and make sure we don't waver from them too much. So I'll go through these very quickly, and a few of them are obvious, and a few of them are maybe risk factors to consider to strengthen. So early and continuous delivery of software. So the intent is every 2 weeks or 4 weeks we have something that comes out that is valuable to the end user. There is a way to manage change by the backlog review. We deliver working software frequently, which could be the 2-week or the 4-week increments. There's a collaboration between the customer, product owner, end user, and the developers. So they work together daily on the clarification of the work and the demonstration and feedback. And the team acts as a self-motivated team to kind of work with their own goals, they've been given, and we kind of trust them to kind of do the work. So that's one set of principles we want to maintain as we then add things to Scrum. The second set, the first one there is face-to-face conversation, is deemed to be the most efficient and effective method of conveying information. And that's true. Face-to-face does have a higher bandwidth than maybe email or tweeting or texting or documentation. But also it has its downfalls too, because if the other client is, or the other team member is 1,000 miles away in different time zones, there's a risk there too. So we'll discuss that risk a little later on. Working software is the primary measure of progress. The teams maintain a constant pace, so the 2-week increment or the 4-week increment gives them a constant pace or a momentum to kind of stay within. The continuous attention to technical excellence and good design. So this is a principle, but actually not something that's actually covered particularly well in Scrum and Agile. And that's one of the items we'll discuss more specifically, is that what does it mean to do good design, or where is design in the Scrum method? Simplicity, the art to maximize the amount of work not done, so keeping the backlog clean and prioritized, and then looking at the work of the project to making sure we only add value to the end user. The teams are self-organizing. Again, that could be a very good thing to have a team self-organized and we trust them to do the work. But that could also be a risk factor we'll discuss too, because not every team has the skill set to self-organize. And then at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective. So there's a very good practice of a retrospective built into every 2-week or 4-week increment, but not all the time the teams either take those actions or share those with other parts of the organization. So we'll discuss that one in more detail too. And then for people unfamiliar with CMMI, so let me first state at the beginning, I just mentioned CMMI here as an example toolbox. There are many other toolboxes around which you could use in addition or instead of this one. You can go to many books on software and IT solution activities. There are many classes, there are many web pages, and many methods out there that have a similar set of practices. So when I say strengthening Scrum, and then a comparison to level 3, there's no indication or even implication here that you have to either use CMMI or any particular model or collection of practices. This is just one example I'm going to talk to that we get from, and then add things from it to Scrum to address the problems that we may have seen in our implementation. And even looking at the model doesn't commit you to being a level 2 or level 3 or being appraised. You could look at the model just as a pure toolbox of activities to consider when you identify where the issues are on the project. So in this particular picture on slide 12, level 1 means that you do whatever you do and you get that result. This could be world-class, it could be complete chaos, and a very bad result. But typically, when people indicate level 1 or they demonstrate level 1, there's a lot of risk, a lot of surprise, and a lot of rework, a lot of bugs and problems and issues that have to be recovered and repaired downstream. And so the essence of level 2 and the toolbox of level 2 is really basic project management, and you get a lot of these things just by doing Scrum and Agile. Not all of them, but many of the things map actually very well to Scrum and Agile activities, because Scrum is a project management methodology that has some of the same activities as level 2. And then as we do those things on the right-hand side, you see that risk and rework should go down. That's really the acid or litmus test for doing anything particularly well, whether